So they said to me, look, we like what you guys are doing. We'd like to this kind of stuff. We're going to get rid of them. We're going to buy
Çıkıyoruz ama çok yolda geliyor. Yolda inleyen olmuşuz bir ara. Evet. Vaktinde gelenleri bekletiyoruz ama bir de önce geliyor bazen de maç oluyor. Ama çok iyi oluyor vallahi. Ama tabii.
Babam ne der bana biliyor musun? Her şey çok iyi demiş. Vakti de gelmiyor öğrenebilirsen.
Sabancı Vakfı Mütevelli Heyeti Başkanı Sayın Güler Sabancı, üçüncü sektörün değerli temsilcileri, saygıdeğer konuklar, basınımızın değerli temsilcileri. Sabancı Vakfı tarafından düzenlenen Hayırseverlik Dünyayı Değiştirebilir mi konulu seminerimize hoş geldiniz. Bu yılki seminerimiz bizim için özel bir anlam taşıyor. Çünkü bu yıl Sadıka Sabancı'nın 100. doğum yıl dönümü. Sadıka Hanım'ın Sabancı için önemi büyük. Kendisi tüm mal varlığını vakfımıza bağışlayarak vakfın kurulması ve insanların hayatında fark yaratması için önemli bir adım atmıştır. Bu yılki seminerimiz de bize yol gösteren hayırseverlik anlayışı nedeniyle Sadıka Hanım'a ithaf ettik ve bugünün anısına kendisi için kısa bir film hazırladık. Dilerseniz öncelikle hazırladığımız bu kısa filmi hep birlikte izleyelim.
O, dünyada edindiği serveti bir gün bile sahiplenmedi. Onun için önemli ve değerli olan, sahip olduğu ne varsa bu dünyadan göçmeden vermek ve paylaşmaktı. Sadıka Hanım için mutluluk, vermekten, başkasının yüzünde gördüğü sevinçten geçiyordu. En ufak kazancından fitresini, zekatını dağıtmayı önce Allah'a, sonra kendine hep borç bilirdi. Çünkü onun için en önemli fazilet kazancını paylaşmaktı. Gittikçe kalabalıklaşan ailesindeki herkese sevgi ve saygıyla yaklaşan Sadıka Hanım, oğullarına, torunlarına, hatta torunlarının çocuklarına da hep aynı öğüdü verdi.
Kocam kazanırdı ama biz de ha vurup harman savurmazdık. Her şeyi ölçülüydü. Her şeyi lamba bizden gaz lambası yansa gider söndürürdük. Kazanmak kadar tasarruf etmek de mühim.
Aynı sudan içmiş, aynı ekmeği bölüşmüş oğulları da öğüdü hayatları boyunca tuttu. Bunun en güzel ispatı da rahmetli babalarının adına bir vakıf kurmaya girişmeleriydi. Oğullar kendi sermayelerinden de paylarını ortaya koyarak bir vakıf kuracak, adına da Hacı Ömer Sabancı Vakfı diyeceklerdi. Sadıka Hanım, bu vakıf ne işe yarayacak, benim fitre zekat vermem gibi bir şey mi diye sorduğunda, oğlu Sakıp hemen atıldı. Aynen öyle anacığım. Ama onun müesseseleşmiş hali. Sadıka Hanım, bu cevabı duyar duymaz, bana ait ne varsa alın ve hepsini vakfa verin dediğinde, Yıl 1974'tü. Sahip olduklarından o kadar habersizdi ki ertesi gün servetini gazetelerden öğrendi. Sadıka Sabancı kendisine ait 25 milyon lirayı eğitim ve hayır işlerine bağışladı diye yazıyordu tüm gazeteler. Bağış işlemleri için evine gelen yetkililerin karşısına geçti ve yüce gönüllülüğü yıllarca bir ibadet gibi yerine getirmiş, eşi Hacı Ömer'in resminin altında gururla poz verdi. Sadıka Sabancı'nın aklı hala köyünde, dağıtacağı yardımlardayken vakıfta hızla büyümeye başlamıştı. Öyle ki ardı ardına okullar, kütüphaneler, sağlık ocakları, spor tesisleri, öğretmen evleri, öğrenci yurtları, engelliler için rehabilitasyon merkezleri açılıyor, yüzünü bile görmediği binlerce gencin hayır duasını alıyordu. Yaptığı bağışlar nedeniyle kendisine yılın annesi plaketi verildiğinde o isimsiz gençlere de bir selam göndermişti. Sabancı ailesinin her üyesinde var olan bu topraklardan kazandıklarını bu toprakların insanlarıyla paylaşma prensibi meyvesini verdikçe Sadıka Hanım'ın gönlü daha da bir rahatlıyor, Hacı Meri'nin yas ateşini bir nebze olsun söndürmeye çalışıyordu. Yüzünden eksilmeyen tebessümü, okuldan değil hayattan aldığı bilgeliğiyle bir gün Sadıka Sabancı için de geldi göç vakti. Nicedir sessizce izlediği bu dünyanın tüm nimetlerini tatmış, tatmayanların ayağına kadar götürmüş, giderken yanına bir tek gönül hoşluğu ve iç rahatlığını almıştı. Kayseri'nin Akçakaya köyünde nohut oda, bakla sofa bir evde başlayan hayatı, İstanbul'da bir bir yükselen kulelerden çıkan projelerde, kültür merkezlerinde sergilenen eserlerde ve yüzlerce eğitim kurumlarında okuyan gençlerin geleceğinde bir kez daha yeşerecekti. Sadıka Hanım'ın mutluluktan anladığı işte tam da buydu. O mutluluğu ailesinde son anına kadar sevindirdikleri, okuttukları, hayata hazırladığı insanların yüzlerinde aradı, buldu ve arkasında onu minnetle anan binlerce kişiyi bırakarak Dengi'nin, Hacı Meri'nin yanına göçüp gitti.
Sadıka Hanım'ı saygı, sevgi ve rahmetle anıyoruz. Değerli konuklar, 2007 yılından beri Sabancı Vakfı seminerlerinde bir araya geliyoruz. Önce vakıfların değişen rolleri, ardından hibe programlarıyla fark yaratmak ve en son erişilebilir toplumlar yaratmak başlıklı seminerlerinde beraber dinledik, aydınlandık. Bugün ise hayırseverlik dünyayı değiştirebilir mi sorusuna yanıt arıyoruz. Pek çok kültürün ve özellikle Türkiye'nin geçmişinde hayırseverlik olgusu oldukça tanıdıktır. Ancak diğer alanlarda olduğu gibi hayırseverlikte yaklaşımlar ve uygulamalar değişiyor, gelişiyor. Yıllar önce Rockefeller ve Carnegie gibi öncül hayırseverlerin daha etkin modellerin gelişmesi için attığı adımlar, günümüzde Bill Gates gibi birçok özel sektör lideri atmaya devam ediyor. Bunu da yaparken yeni teknolojiler ve araçlar kullanıyorlar. Bugün seminerimizde milyar dolarlık bir sektör haline gelen hayırseverliğin dünyayı değiştirme gücünü, potansiyelini ve etkisini tartışıyor olacağız. Bugün tartışmalarımızda ışık tutacak dünya çapında uzman ve fikir liderleri olan iki konuşmacımız var. Bugün aramızda oldukları için Sabancı Vakfı adına The Economist dergisinden Matthew Bishop ve Belçika'daki King Bedouin Vakfı'ndan Luc Théart'a teşekkürlerimi sunuyorum. Programımıza başlamadan önce seminerinizin moderatörü olarak akış hakkında size kısa bir bilgi vermek istiyorum. Sabancı Vakfı Mütevelli Heyeti Başkanı Sayın Güler Sabancı'nın açılış konuşmasından sonra konuşmacılarımızı sizlere takdim edeceğim. Kendileri yaklaşık 20'şer dakikalık birer sunuş yapacaklar. Kısa bir aradan sonra üçümüz söyleşi formatında bir tartışmaya geçeceğiz. Ve elbette sizin değerli soru ve yorumlarınız için zaman ayıracağız. Şimdi Sabancı Vakfı Mütevelli Heyeti Başkanı Sayın Güler Sabancı'yı açılış konuşmasını yapmak üzere kürsüye davet ediyorum.
Değerli vakıf ve sivil toplum temsilcileri, saygıdeğer konuşmacılarımız, değerli misafirlerimiz, sevgili dostlarımız, çok değerli basının temsilcileri, Sabancı Center'a hoş geldiniz. Sabancı Vakfı seminerleri biraz önce Filiz'in de söylediği gibi 4.'sünü yapıyoruz. Ve hepinize katılımınız için özellikle bugünkü hava hakikaten çok caydırıcı. Ona rağmen geldiğiniz ve katıldığınız için hepimiz adına sizlere teşekkür ediyorum. Bugün 10 Aralık 2010. Geçen sene de aynı tarihte yapmıştık bu semineri. Geçen yılki seminerimizin konusu, bazı arkadaşlarımız hatırlayacaklar, katılımcılarımız, erişilebilir toplum yaratmaktı. Bu yıl ise hep beraber hayırseverlik dünyayı değiştirebilir mi? Değiştirebilir mi acaba? Bu sorunun yanıtlarını arayacağız. Evet, konuşmacılarımız bu konularda uzman kişiler. Onlarla birlikte bu sorunun yanıtlarını arayacağız. Bugün biraz önce de filmini seyrettiğimiz gibi ayrıca bizim için, vakfımız için, Sabancı Vakfı için çok önemli, bizim için, hepimiz için bir rol model olan babaannem Sayın Sadıka Sabancı'nın da 100. yıl dönümü. Bu seminerin aynı tarihe gelmesi bize Sadıka Sabancı'yı anma ve onu biraz daha sizlerle paylaşma imkanı verdi. Zaten o daha fazlasını da istemezdi. Çekinirdi fazlasından, göz önünde olmaktan. Evet, rahmetli babaannem 36 yıl önce tüm varlığını bağışlayarak bugünkü Sabancı Vakfı'nın temellerini attı. Bu vakıf bu temeller üzerinde ondan sonra tüm Sabancı ailesinin ve Sabancı çalışanlarının destekleriyle bugüne geldi. Sadık Hanım kendisi bugün saygıyla ve özlemle andığımız Sadık Hanım, benim babaannem, 2 Dünya Savaşı'nın etkilerini görmüş, Cumhuriyet'in kuruluşunu görmüş, köyden kente göçü görmüş, fakirlikten zenginliği görmüş bir kişiydi. Ve tüm yaşamı boyunca çok akıllı ama aklından daha fazla çalışkan, çalışan, becerikli, sabırlı, tutumlu, biraz önce gördünüz, gaz lambasını bile söndürürdük diyor. Ve bütün bunların yanında çok yapıcı bir kişilikti. Çok pozitif bir kişilikti bugünkü tabirle. Ama bütün bunların yanında gerçekti, yakındı, sıcaktı. Beni en çok etkileyen de tahmin edebileceğiniz gibi 6 oğlu, 6 gelini, torunları, oldukça yakın akrabalarıyla birlikte oluşu, fakat bunun ötesinde düşünebilmesiydi. Bu kalabalık ailenin içinde dahi mahallesindekini, İstanbul'dakini, Adana'dakini, köyündekini, ihtiyacı olanı bulurdu, bilirdi ve el uzatırdı. Onlara cesaret verir, sessizce onları takip ederdi. Büyük bir kısmını bilmezdik. Onu kaybettikten sonra öğrendik. Kimlere el uzattığını, kimleri okuttuğunu, kimleri takip ettiğini. Dolayısıyla hayırseverlik babaannem için dünyanın, yaşamın bir parçasıydı. Bugün Sabancı Vakfı olarak 10 Aralık tarihinde bu semineri düzenlememizin ikinci önemli anlamı da bugün dünyada Birleşmiş Milletler İnsan Hakları Günü. Geçen sene de bugün düzenledik. Yine aynı gün düzenliyoruz bu sebepten. Hayırseverlik ve sivil toplum çalışmalarının insan hakları için çok önemli bir yeri olduğunu hepimiz biliyoruz. Bugünkü konuşmacılarımız da bu konuda bize önemli örnekleri paylaşacaklar. Bu seminerleri de arzu ediyoruz ki dünyadaki güzel, iyi ve doğru örnekleri sizlerle paylaşalım ve en iyileri, kendi konusundaki en iyileri davet etmeye çalışıyoruz. Bugünkü konuşmacılarımız The Economist dergisinin New York büro şefi Matthew Bishop ve King Bodin Vakfı'nın direktörü Luke DeBorns ve kendilerine sizlerin adına bir kere daha teşekkür ediyorum bize katıldıkları için. Benim çok sevdiğim bir söz var. Çok değerli Amerikan filozofu William James'in beğendiğim bir sözü. Hayatı değerlendirmenin en iyi yolu onu kendinden, yani hayatın kendisinden daha uzun süren bir şey için harcamaktır diyor. Evet, hayırseverlik böyle bir şey diye inanıyorum. Bugün hep beraber bir şeyler yapmamız gerekiyor. Hayırseverlik, Sadıka Sabancı'nın kendi çapında yaptığı dönemden bugün geldiğimiz dünyada, 21. yüzyıldaki hayırseverlikte artık birlikte hareket etmeyi, birlikten güç almayı gerektiriyor. Küresel dünyanın gerekleri, küresel dünyanın sorunlarıyla birlikte sivil toplum örgütleri birlikte hareket ederek ancak çözüm üretebileceğimizi gösteriyor. Biz de Sabancı Vakfı olarak bugün dünyanın bu gündeminde kendimize düşen görevi yapmaya çalışıyoruz. Sivil toplum kuruluşlarının sosyal adaletin sağlanması, küresel fakirlikle mücadele, eğitim, sağlık ve diğer toplumsal sorunlara olan çözüm üretmelerinin yanı sıra artık biliyoruz ki karar alma mekanizmalarını etkileme, oralarda, o noktalarda sorumluluk almamız da gerekiyor. Sabancı Vakfı olarak biz de sorumluluklarımızın 36 yıldır farkında olarak bugün yeni bir döneme doğru yol açıyoruz kendimize. Bu yeni dönemde sizlerle daha önce de paylaştığımız gibi kadınlar, gençler ve engellilere odaklanmayı, diğer sivil toplum örgütleriyle işbirlikleri yapmayı gündemimize ve stratejimiz olarak kabul ettik. Bu anlamda hibe programları yapıyoruz bildiğiniz gibi. Bu sene 2011 için şu anda 52 ilimizden 190 tane başvuru geldi hibe programlarına. Bu ilgi ve artan bu ilgi bizi çok mutlu ediyor. Görünüyor ki ülkemizde sivil toplum örgütleri gelişiyor. Birlikte ortak proje yapabilmemiz gitgide daha kolay oluyor. Ve burada birçok arkadaşımı görüyorum. Sivil toplum örgütlerinde, vakıflarda görev yapan arkadaşlarım. Semahat Hanım bize cesaret veriyor. Ayşe Hanım burada. Doğan Vakfı'nı görüyorum. Evet, birlikte bir şeyler yapıyoruz ve birlikte olmaktan Türkiye'ye, ülkemize fark yaratacağımıza da gönülden inanıyorum. Ve hepimiz biliyoruz ki bu işler uzun soluklu işler. Bu işler sabır ve gönül işleri. Evet, bu anlamda müsaade ederseniz her şeyin para olmadığını, verilen desteklerin sadece parayla ölçülemeyeceğini hepimiz biliyoruz. Ve bu anlamda arkadaşlarıma, Sabancı Vakfı'ndaki başta Hüsnü Bey olmak üzere Zerrin Hanım'a, gönüllü olarak birazdan yine bizlerle beraber olacak olan Filiz'e ve tüm Sabancı Vakfı'ndaki arkadaşlarıma başarılı çalışmaları için ve her şeyden önce gönüllü katkıları için hepimiz adına sonsuz teşekkürlerimi sunuyorum. Bir kez daha geldiniz, katıldınız, bugünümüzü paylaştığınız için Sabancı Vakfı adına hepinize teşekkür ediyorum. Paylaşmak, desteklemek ve cesaretlendirmek olarak toplayabileceğim, bu 3 cümlede toplayabileceğim hayırseverliği hep beraber daha iyi günlere getireceğimize inanıyor. Bu seminerin hepimize faydalı geçmesini diliyorum. Çok teşekkür ederim.
Sayın Güler Sabancı'ya konuşması için teşekkür ediyoruz. İlham verdiniz. Şimdi değerli konuşmacılarımızı sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Bu arada hepinize böyle bir biyografi verdik. Elinizde olmayanları hosteslerimiz de destek verebilir. Buradan da takip edebilirsiniz. Konuşmacılarımızın CV'leri oldukça uzun. Bugün ilk konuşmacımız Matthew Bishop. Matthew, The Economist dergisinin Amerikan İş Dünyası editörü ve New York büro şefidir. Daha önce London School of Economics'te öğretim görevlisi olarak çalışan Bishop, özelleştirme, regülasyon ve şirket evlilikleri alanında 3 kitabın ortak yazarıdır. Michael Green ile beraber kaleme aldığı 2 kitap var. Biri The Road from Ruin, How to Renew Capitalism and Put America Back on Top. Diğeri ise Philanthrocapitalism, How Can Giving Save the World? Bishop, Dünya Ekonomi Forumu'nda genç global lider olarak onurlandırılmış ve yine Dünya Ekonomik Forumu'nda hayırseverlik ve sosyal yatırım Küresel Gündem Konseyi Genel Başkanlığını yapmıştır. Philanthrocapitalist yaklaşımın mimarlarından Matthew Bishop'ı sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Thank you. Okay. İkinci konuşmacımız Luc Taillart de Worms. Luc'ün vakıfçılık ve hayırseverlik alanında 20 yılı aşkın bir tecrübesi var. Kendisi King Baudouin Vakfı yönetici direktörü olmasının yanı sıra birçok kurumda etkin rol alıyor. Sivil toplum kuruluşlarının küresel bilgi bankası olan Uluslararası Guidesar'ın yönetim kurulu başkanı, Avrupa Politika Merkezi Danışma Konseyi üyesi, Avrupa Girişimci Hayırseverlik Derneği'nin mütevelli heyeti üyesi ve King Baudouin Vakfı'nın Amerika Şubesi'nin icra kurulu üyesidir. Luc ayrıca Foundations, Creating Impact in a Globalized World'ın yazarı ve birçok kitabın editörü. Vakıfçılık alanında engin bilgisini bizimle paylaşmak üzere kendisine sahneye davet ediyorum. Evet, bu noktadan sonra seminerimize İngilizce olarak devam edeceğiz. Türkçe takip etmek isteyen misafirlerimiz için kulaklıklar var, mevcut. Hosteslerimiz sizlere yardımcı olabilirler. Okay. So, welcome. We had a little bit of a late start, but we will continue now until not 12:30 but 12:45. As I said previously, we will give a break in about 45 minutes. So welcome again to Istanbul and to the Sabancı Center. Thank you both for being here. Can philanthropy change the world? Easy question, a lot of time to talk about it. I'm sure we can have all the answers by the end. We're very much looking forward to hearing from you. So without further ado, Matthew.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. As a British person, I very much appreciate the trouble you've gone to get the rain in for me so I can feel at home. Also, it was great to have the inspiring movie there about the Sabancı Center and the inspiration that has brought this about. In June 2006, I had the privilege of being invited to the New York Public Library, where Warren Buffett made his famous announcement that he would give away almost all of his wealth over the remainder of his life, most of that money going to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And this meeting ended with Warren Buffett and Bill and Melinda on stage, shaking hands very vigorously whilst the great and the good of New York cheered wildly. I was in the audience and found myself asking many questions about what was going on. How was it that the two most successful and wealthy business people of our age, certainly in America, but perhaps of the world, were standing on stage together, planning to give away most of their wealth, at that time an estimated $70 or $80 billion, towards the poor of the world and those who are facing some of the most perilous and difficult lives. Why were they doing it? Were they exceptional, or were they part of a broader trend? And above all, could they achieve the change that they hoped to achieve through their giving? Warren Buffett at that meeting said that giving money away is actually much, much harder than making money, or at least giving away money effectively. Anyone can give it away. The difficulty is, he said, that in business you go after the low-hanging fruit, the easy things, the simplest place that you can make money. When you're trying to do philanthropy effectively, your goal is to tackle some of the most difficult and challenging issues facing the world, and to do it in a way that is more effective than some of the great people that have struggled with those issues over decades or centuries before you. So the book Philanthrocapitalism came out of that moment and my desire as a journalist and as a thinker to find out what was really going on. And I spoke to many philanthropists around the world, but also to politicians, to people in charities, in non-profits, to people in business, to social entrepreneurs, with my co-author, Michael Green. And the first thing that's important to say is that this is not just a couple of isolated individuals, isolated billionaires like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. This is part of a movement. It's become a more formal movement in the past couple of years because of the giving pledge that Bill and Warren have established, which has seen them so far sign up 57 billionaires in America who have promised to give away at least half of their wealth during their lifetime. This week we had a number of new announcements, including Mark Zuckerberg, the co-founder of Facebook website, who at 26 years old has already made a $100 million donation to education in Newark, one of the most rundown cities in North America, and has now promised to give away at least half of his multiple billion-dollar wealth at that young age. But it's also a movement where Bill Gates and Warren Buffett have gone on the road. They were in China recently. I think they scared off a lot of the wealthy new billionaires of China initially, but they, after a while, managed to persuade them back to the table and to have a first round of discussions about where philanthropy could go in China. They will be in India next spring, where I think they're expecting, given the greater history of philanthropy in India, a really interesting and important discussion with the new wealthy of India about how to deal with some of that society's extraordinary social challenges. We, in our book, call it philanthrocapitalism because it seems to my co-author and I that what's happening at the moment is that a new generation of business people are becoming givers, and they want their giving to be different to how it has often been in the past. Different because it's going to be much like their business, that they're going to bring a strategic vision of change in the world to their giving, and they're going to use their giving, they're going to judge their giving by how effective it is in generating social change. I think in the past, often philanthropy has not focused so much on strategy, on business methods, on impact, but has focused more on a celebration of giving for its own sake. This new generation, I think, increasingly is concerned about solving problems, making a difference, achieving impact. This is actually a tradition that we found to be deeply historical. In our research, we looked back at what we see as 4 great golden ages of wealth creation, going back to the dawn of capitalism in 15th and 16th century Europe, where each time there has been a wave of great entrepreneurial activity. Out of the generation of wealth creators has come at least a few who have tried to use the innovations of their day to change society and address the social problems that the wealth creation process also was part of. So in 15th and 16th century England, you saw the first of the merchant capitalists start to invest in education and healthcare outside of the traditional provision by the church. In the 18th century, you started to see the use of philanthropy that echoed the joint stock company by groups of people sort of investing as shareholders in social enterprises that produced all sorts of interesting changes. 19th century England also was, I think, one of the periods in history where it was really regarded as a responsibility of anyone who made a significant amount of money to get involved in dealing with some of the big social problems of the day. And I know there is a strong historical tradition in this part of the world too of foundation giving that goes back many centuries. So why is this revolution in philanthropy, this philanthrocapitalism, happening again today? Well, obviously one reason is that we are in a golden era of wealth creation again, even when we put aside the dreadful financial crash of 2 years ago, which wiped out so much wealth. The underlying trends are still extremely positive. As you know only too well, in this country, there's been an unleashing of entrepreneurialism, of bringing people into the economy and of generating economic growth. And we see this in many parts of the world. And the number of billionaires in the world, which is an indicator of where that process is going, is now well over 1,000, having been under 500 a decade ago. So that gives you a sense of perspective of how little difference, in a way, the financial turmoil of the past 2 years has made. But the second reason now is important, is that it seems to me that real questions are being asked about how to create societies that work effectively in the 21st century. And many of the answers that were tried in the 20th century, those that particularly focused on the government as the main source of answers to social problems, we found the limitations of those models, and that the government is increasingly unable to solve the sorts of problems that face a society in the 21st century, let alone the problems that face the world when you start to think about the challenges of climate change or sort of terrorism or mass migration and so forth. And that we need new answers, and that increasingly those new answers are going to be coming from the private sector and from the same entrepreneurial people who've managed to make successful businesses, applying that same way of thinking to society's problems. And increasingly, philanthrocapitalism is about a celebration of that private sector ingenuity put to work in the public good. And the question we face is, how can we redesign our institutions as a society, whether they be in government or in business, so that they effectively tap that entrepreneurial dynamism and put it to work for the public good? So what is the role of philanthropy in this new world that we think is unfolding all across the world in the 21st century? Well, I see philanthropy, the money that is given away, as society's risk capital. That if you look at the other institutions of society, whether it be government or business, they find it increasingly hard to take long-term, risky initiatives to back ideas that are outside of the box, that don't fit easily with conventional wisdom. This is clearly the case with governments in democracies where politicians are increasingly afraid of doing anything that's controversial because they fear that they will be thrown out if they do. And so there's a real problem of bureaucratization, of a loss of dynamism in the government sector. But I think businesses, certainly in stock markets where there's a real focus on short-term profits, it's very hard to follow strategies that might be very positive and profitable in the long run, but involve heavy short-term hits to profitability. And so there's a whole spectrum of activities that are not able to be pursued by companies that ought to be pursued by companies. So philanthropy ought to play the role of the risk capital, because there's no obligation to any short-term interests. The money can be used to do anything, and so it should take risks. But it's not just about the money, it's about the creativity of the people who are giving the money away, to bring their entrepreneurial mindset to bear on society's problems. So very briefly, I just want to run down a few areas where I see there to be great opportunity. And the underlying message is that the goal of giving ought to be to take risks in areas where there is an opportunity for leverage, where your money can achieve an outsized impact by finding bottlenecks in the system or tipping points where a relatively small amount of money applied cleverly can make a massive difference. I was very struck by talking to Bill Gates. Bill Gates has given away probably more money than any person in history, and yet I think that his foundation gave away $4 billion last year alone in grants. And he said to me, we are a very tiny organization. The amount of money we can give is very small compared to the amount of money that governments spend, or even that a big business, multinational business would spend. And therefore, I have to think really hard about how do I use my money to the greatest effect. And if that's the biggest philanthropist in the world, the same challenges apply to every other philanthropist. How do you use your money in a way to generate leverage? And so one way in which people are increasingly clever, I think, and as we report in the book, is to use their money to engage in the battle of ideas, to try and change the way the public thinks, which in turn will influence, through public opinion, what governments do. Very interesting initiative in America at the moment is one example called, based around a movie called Waiting for Superman, which is really about how do you change education policy in America, which is failing very badly. America is now 26th, I think, in the OECD rankings for education. And the movie highlights some problems. It's accompanied by a text phone number to get people to sit, as they watch the movie, to text in to join a non-profit mass organization that's focused on education policy. There's a book that's published alongside the movie. The book contains a number that you can go to a website where a philanthropist has provided money that individuals can give to a program in a classroom in America. And so you have this sort of multimedia strategy working with non-profits in partnership with governments, in partnership with other organizations to really change policy. You see the Gates Foundation is working in both education and in dealing with diseases in the developing world, where it again has changed the agenda of the World Health Organization. Michael Bloomberg became mayor of New York and because he thought he could run the city like a business in terms of efficiency, and found he couldn't, and so he had to create outside of government kind of skunk works where new policies could be tried out and experiments could take place, and philanthropists funded the experiments that were too risky to get through the political process. When the experiments worked, they could be brought in and scaled up by the government through the city budget. In business also, companies like Walmart and Coca-Cola have changed their strategies because they now understand that they need to engage with society in dealing with problems like climate change and water shortages, so that they can actually make sure that they're on the side of progress, not on the side of the problems. There's also a focus now on actually providing this, what I call the soft infrastructure of the wealth creation process. We all understand hard infrastructure, you know, bridges, tunnels, roads, and so forth, and how important those are to economic growth. But increasingly the evidence is that in the 21st century, you need the soft infrastructure of civil society, of entrepreneurs, of knowledge sharing, and so forth, and that philanthropists can play a very important role in generating that soft infrastructure. Here, I know the Endeavour organization is very good at promoting high-impact entrepreneurs who require the network of connections to grow from being small businesses into great businesses. That's one of many examples I see. Particularly, also we see a focus in investing in entrepreneurs in Africa as a way of trying to help those economies that are currently very impoverished generate wealth. My last point, and I know time is very short, is that this is not just about the rich. One of the most exciting phenomena, I think, that's going on at the moment is what we call crowd power or mass philanthrocapitalism. The internet has facilitated giving by, much more effective giving by the ordinary public, and I'm very excited to see a lot of American philanthrocapitalists investing in helping that process along, working in partnership with mass movements of giving to really change the whole way the world is working around traditional charity becoming more strategic and impact focused. And anyone who doesn't know the organization Kiva, K-I-V-A, which is about lending to small entrepreneurs around the world, should look at that organization as a sort of model for how the future of mass charity is going to go. And that's an organization that's been supported by a number of prominent philanthropists. So I want to close by saying that this is an extraordinary moment in history. I think that at stake now is the future of society in the 21st century. It could go two ways, and it's in the enlightened self-interest, I believe, of the wealthy to really focus hard on this question of how can we, through our philanthropy, play a positive long-term role in building societies that are inclusive and based on human rights and based on effectiveness for the 21st century. That those countries where the successful entrepreneurs do engage in that process are going to be in much better shape in 10 or 20 years' time than those societies where the wealthy do not engage in that process. So on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Full of live examples. I should just flash the book now for all of you. Philanthrocapitalism, How Giving Can Save the World, available at your bookstore. This is a book full of many of the examples that Matthew referred to, and many, many more, with a foreword written by Bill Clinton. And it really is inspiring. And I love that you mentioned Waiting for Superman. It's the same director of the film that Al Gore also put together on climate change, An Inconvenient Truth. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the founder of eBay, Pierre Omidyar's participant media company, which is for-profit, but develops films like this to raise awareness around key social issues. So thank you, Matthew. And the floor is yours, Luc. Let me, before Luc, you start, just also flash Luc's book, Foundations Creating Impact in a Globalized World. Also full of very rich examples of foundations, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Phyllis. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and congratulations on your already impressive track record and your legacy. I think that Sabanci and the Sabanci family is a real example. Also, thank you to Matthew. I mean, how often does it happen that a journalist is defending something in a positive way, in a very constructive way, and really going around the world saying how great philanthropy is. So we have in the philanthropic sector to be very, very grateful for him. I'm going to talk a little bit about the other side of the coin. He's saying a lot of new people, philanthropists, are coming in, which is absolutely great and to applaud. I'm going, as you have been saying, Matthew, a little bit on the other side. It is very difficult to spend money. And so let me look a little bit at that. I want to go back to my university years, and apparently there was a kind of a predestination why I would end up in a foundation. I wrote a thesis, and somewhere in that thesis at the end, I used a story to show which type of choices you have before you in life when you want to work on public goods and what to do. It was a story about boat races, and there were boat races before a coast, and there were a lot of people on the beach, and there were people in the water. And people, because of those boat races, were drowning. And some people on the beach didn't do anything. That's what's happened in society, but a lot of people did something. Some people went in and saved one person, which is great. Another group of people tried to find a boat, went into the water, and saved 20 people. Another group of people went to the organizers and stopped the boat race so that no longer people would drown. And another type of people said this cannot happen again, so we have to change this. We have to make sure that in the future those boat races don't come that close to the coast anymore. So let's try to eventually regulate that or auto-regulate that. That's another discussion. Who is going to decide what to do? And I think this is a good image to keep in mind, because it is the type of choices we all face when we want to do public good, is where do we situate ourselves? And I would like to stress that everything that has been done in this story is good. So there is no value judgment to say that one is better than the other. But it is a choice. So what can we learn from this, in my opinion, about philanthropy, and that's what we see, is that there is a lot of diversity in philanthropy. People are making different choices how to function and how to operate. You have the people, I would say, who, like the first two groups who saved one or saved a group of people, who are funding service delivery. They are making sure that some people are saved, that some people have food, that some people are cured, that some families have a future. If I take an example in Congo and in Burundi and other countries in Africa, there is a foundation, a Swiss foundation, who works on HIV/AIDS. And what they are doing is selecting 100 families every time. They call it a village. It's not a real village, it's 100 families. And they are following those people and those families over 3 years. Following means they make sure they are tested, first of all, about if they are HIV positive or not. They make sure that they have the medicines. They make sure that they have the food and the right alimentation. But at the same time, they are helping, mostly the women, as often the case, that the women are starting a micro business. So they're loaning money. They're going to the market. And after 3 years, they make sure, that is the result, that's the impact, that those 100 families are economically independent. They're of course not rich, but at least they have food, their children go to school, and they have a medicine followed up. This is very important, and this is service delivery, and you help a lot of people. Other people, and Matthew has been already singled it out, work on ideas, on change of attitudes, get more information in societies about new things. It's quite ambitious and it's very difficult, and that's, I think, I'm all for to use as maximum of business methods in philanthropy. But changing the world or changing society is a longer term thing. So you cannot be on short shareholder or stakeholder value. You have to take the long term. If I take an example of my foundation, we in Belgium, as the rest of Europe, in fact, see our population aging, which means that problems of dementia, of Alzheimer, is something which is there more and more. There is a huge problem with Alzheimer and dementia, of course, from the medical side, but there is also an attitude problem. It's a little bit like cancer 40 years ago. When you say to you today, you have Alzheimer, people think it's finished. My life is finished, I cannot do anything. And that's happening also. Judges are making statements that they cannot drive a car anymore, that they cannot have no access to money anymore. Notaries are saying you cannot deal with your will. It's not so simple medically. So we put as an objective to change the attitudes towards, so you have to work with media, you have to partner up, but we know that it will take 10, 15 years. We know that we have to use different methods. We will give grants to civil society organizations who are working with those patients. We work with local authorities to make sure that their police and other people are better informed when they find somebody on the street who is lost. We work with media companies to do campaigns about it. We also have research funds to make sure that the research is moving on. But it shows that you cannot use one method if you want really leverage and to change something in society. It shows that you have to be patient, but it shows also you have to think. And you have to think what you are doing. You have to think about your change theory. The third thing is, of course, the most ambitious thing, is that you really change paradigms or you change policies in society. And that's even more complicated because there you have to work with the other partners who have the power, the legitimacy, which means a lot. Governments means corporate sector. We are tiny, as Matthew also has already said, but we can do things. If I look back of what we did more than 10 years ago for quite a long time, it was then called social economy. Today we call it social entrepreneurs. We supported a lot of social entrepreneurs, hundreds of them, but we made sure we did seminars, learnings. We made sure that there became a regulation so that there was a new legal form even for this type of organizations, this type of enterprises, I would call them like that, which have a mixed financing, public and private. So as a foundation, you can move things, but it takes time, and it has. So in that context, what does it mean, changing the world or save the world? It can mean many different things. And what I use a lot these days is a phrase which says, less pretension and more ambition. Less pretension and more ambition. I think we have to be modest all. We are small but very important players because we have the flexibility, we are free to act, we can bring in new ideas. But so we have to be extremely ambitious. But pay attention about hubris. We are not the ones who are going to do it alone. You cannot do it alone. The problems are too big, we are too small, societies are too complex. So when you speak about impact in philanthropy, it depends also on what type of work you are doing. And again, there I think there is no judgment. People are working in culture. People have museums. People are saving arts. It's important. It's as important as other things. So it's not to say changing the world and helping the poor in Africa is more important than saving arts. I think it's a choice. You have to respect those choices. You have people who are in science. If you look to the Wellcome Trust in the UK, which is one of the biggest foundation in Europe, and pretty close to Gates, they are in medical research. Thanks to the Wellcome Trust, the Human Genome Projects, which they financed, this human genetic, what we know about ourselves is now public. It's not only in private hands. They made sure that they had a parallel research system, which was there for public benefit, for the public goods, and not only in the hands of the corporate sector. What a huge, important thing they did there, because they made sure for the future that this was not something which would have been seen simply as a pure commercial product. An incredible impact they have there. Some people work on civil society, has been said. It's great to work on the capacity building of civil society organizations who work, for example, with disabled people. This is extremely important. But it's not the only way, as we have showed. There are people who work only on policy. They have very militant philanthropic organizations who believe that there is one solution to a problem. This can be done when you have one funder who believes in something. I would say in a certain way Soros is a very militant funder. He knows how it should be in the future. I cannot agree on certain things, but okay, it's his money. He has the freedom, that's in democracy the case. You can express that. He does that. So philanthropy is not one thing. So please, let us try not to be reductionist and lose a lot of discussions and debates in spending time to say who is the best. I think there are combinations of methods which are extremely important. Also not a discussion about old and new. The example of São Paulo in Italy, Matthew has mentioned the fact that in Europe it goes back also a very long time. São Paulo, Italy, was created by 7 laymen who wanted to do something in their village Turin, who helped poor people. They made a hospital, they made a house for people who are without a home. They became to do something which in a way was a little bit microfinance. Because of that, they became a bank. It's amazing, isn't it? And then they became privatized, and they are again a philanthropy. So you see over the history how things can change. So less pretension, more ambition, and not this type of fights between this is the old and the new. I have to stop, apparently, but we have a debate following. So I will stop it here. I think it's a great sector to work in. It's great that new people are coming in. It is not easy to do this work, but it's a fantastic way. It gives a fantastic feeling if you can help by working together to make this a better world. Thank you.
Thank you, Luc. And I was just mentioning how Matthew's book, the foreword, was written by Bill Clinton. The foreword of your book was written by Stephen Schmidt-Heine, who is actually one of these philanthrocapitalists, right? One of these people that are entrepreneurs, earning their money in the business world, but also doing some really radical and different things. So perhaps just 10 minutes before we break, we could talk a little bit about the stories that have inspired you most. You spent a lot of time each putting these books together. If philanthropy can change the world, and I sense your answer is yes, but what have been the most effective stories and examples that you've seen about philanthropy changing the world? Matthew, should we start with you?
You know, I think, firstly, historical stories. You know, I think if you look at the history of the Rockefeller Foundation's support of Borlaug and the whole green revolution that arguably saved 1 billion lives in Asia through improving agricultural productivity. I mean, that is probably the single biggest contribution that philanthropy made by systematically, you know, investing in a whole field of knowledge and the distribution of that knowledge around the world. Earlier, you know, the role of Carnegie in helping to, you know, set up a number of inquiries that thought about the whole development of solutions to poverty in America at the start of the 20th century was very important. More recently, I mean, I really got turned on to the potential of philanthrocapitalism by meeting Bill Gates back in 2001 when he was really just getting started as a philanthropist, and being struck by how passionate he was about it, how he said that he basically was at that point in his life going to parties and people would almost avoid him because they knew he would talk about tuberculosis and the need to do something about it. So he'd become sort of obsessed by it as an issue, and that you know, and just getting that sense that he really believed it was, you know, within the possibility of philanthropy to actually save tens of millions of lives in the developing world through, you know, putting that money to work systematically. I'd never really seen philanthropy as having that potential until I'd had that conversation. So for me, you know, if you look at the results that they're already having through the vaccination programs that have been funded by Gates, clearly they have saved millions of lives. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, the results that we're going to see out of that money are going to be phenomenal. And I think they're going to make a lot of people aware of how much they could do if they started to use their money in a strategic way.
Thank you. Luc, you're also editor of 2 books of stories of philanthropy in Europe. I know a lot of the attention in the media, in the global press, tends to highlight a lot of what happens in America around in philanthropy. And you have a collection of very good examples to share from Europe. What's happening with Europe? Are there philanthrocapitalists movement in Europe, and what are some of the most inspiring things happening in Europe in that angle?
Well, I think that that's one of the things. If I prepared some more points, so let me pick that up. I think one of the important things to keep in mind is that philanthropy, and it's such an evidence, but a lot of people don't think about it that way, is contextual. It means it depends in what type of society you are in. It means which economic system you are in, which socio-economic, social-cultural, religious. It's such an evidence, but we tend to think that philanthropy will have or needs to have the same expression everywhere. Now, in relation to philanthrocapitalism, I think in continental Europe, in general, there is of course already a different relation to money and a different relation to success. It is not something you show off when you are successful and rich in a lot of European countries. It's something you hide even more because it's not a positive thing. It is, you are always, the media are critical, people are always looking at you, so you don't have the same type of need of people to say, I was successful and now I'm going to give back to society. The second thing is that because also of our social economic system and our, I would say, market system, which is a little bit one which is not the same than in the US, is that of course, because of the tax system and all that, you don't have that many people who get that rich in a short time period, like if you take the guy from Facebook. So I don't think there will be the same type of big, but they are there, but they don't show themselves that often. Now, in relation to that, I want to add perhaps this, because you asked for good examples which impressed me to Matthew, is that we have to pay attention to what I call the Gates syndrome, or the giving pledge syndrome, is the idea that now is in society that you can only give or be a successful philanthropist when you are hugely rich. And it's not true. And I think it's the wrong image. I mean, again, it's not against those people, but who do that, that's great. But let's also pay attention for those many people with less money who do fantastic things. We recently had somebody of a small village in Wallonia in Belgium. It was a man of more than 80 years old. He was living in his village. He lived there with his sister and with two of his sisters and himself. He had no children himself. He was the biggest farmer in the village for 2-3 centuries. This family has been supported on a local level, everything which happened socioculturally, from the football to helping the poor people to the music chapel to whatever. And he said, what will happen when I'm not longer there and my family is not longer there? Who is going to support all those people? So he said, I'm going to give you the money, but you have as a mission to make sure that this village can continue to continue like we worked for centuries. Now that is very impressive in my opinion. And it's not Bill Gates. It is a man, a very modest man, who has been living in a small village. So I think we have to look at this phenomenon, and it's very important, but don't forget all the other things which happen. The same. It works?
Okay,
it works back.
I
mean, we have to pay attention to make one definition of philanthropy. People have been traditionally giving in different ways in China, in India, in Africa. And we don't always define it, or they don't fall always in what we call philanthropy. But we should be open about it.
Okay.
Can I just come in on that?
Please.
I mean, I'm nervous as soon as you start saying the giving pledge syndrome, because I mean that's a classic European attitude to anyone doing anything constructive. I mean, it just seems to me, you know, that this is how can we call that a syndrome? That has to be a good thing. I mean, this has to be something we feel positive about. Now, I agree with you that individuals, you know, everyone can be doing something. I think one of the most exciting things that's going on at the moment is how the internet, in particular, the whole world we're living in, is now increasing the ability of people with very little resources suddenly to have an idea that takes off. I mean, one of my favorite charities at the moment is called Movember, M-O-V-E-M-B-R, where basically it was a group of Australians who wanted to grow moustaches to annoy their girlfriends, decided they would raise some money by growing a moustache during the month of November each year. And this has now spread around the world through, it got YouTube videos and so forth. So, and they picked a cause to raise money for, which was prostate cancer research. That organization is now the single largest source of private funding of prostate cancer research. In just 6 years, it's reached that level. But it's now working closely with things like the Milken Institute, so a billionaire philanthropist like Michael Milken is also researching it, with the Live Strong Foundation created by Lance Armstrong. So there's this extraordinary network now that's out there that is forming, that's becoming global, that allows people with no resources to take an idea and scale it up and achieve massive impact. So I think we need to recognize that, that these are not opposites, that they're part of a general ecosystem that's growing.
I think that I said that, but I want to stress, and especially to the media. I got yesterday when I was driving from the airport to hear a call from a journalist, a Belgian journalist from an economic newspaper, because of Zuckerberg's gift. Again, philanthropy came up, and that's great. But it would be a little bit reductionist again if it would only look at what's happening there. I think there is a lot of people doing fantastic things also, as you say, which are, the mustache thing is also individuals. And we have to celebrate all these type of philanthropies. And the good thing is that the philanthropic capitalists, let's say, bring philanthropy on the agenda. I like to use that to also show that there are other things and that they're also valuable.
Just before we go to break, can I ask Matthew, can you tell us all what the Giving Pledge is?
So the Giving Pledge is that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates announced, or created a website where any billionaire who wishes to make a pledge that they will give away at least half of their wealth during their lifetime can post that letter and make that pledge public. And Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are actually calling a lot of the billionaires on the Forbes list and so forth, and others that didn't make it on the list but they know to be wealthy, and are trying to get them to sign the pledge and go public with that commitment. And the reason they want it to be public is that they feel two things will happen. One is that this will be leadership by example, but it will become, and I think it already is becoming, the norm that as you become wealthy, giving becomes part of what is what makes you a respected wealthy person rather than one that isn't respected. And secondly, that once people go public with their commitment, it then leads to a conversation about, well, how do you do this giving in a way that's effective? And so that's going to be the next step. I think that people will go public, and then there'll be a conversation going on about, well, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? What are you trying to achieve with your money? Which I think will be very helpful, because philanthropy is a very opaque field at the moment. People don't really know what's going on and what anyone else is doing and what works and what doesn't work. And so there's a real move to kind of make it a much more transparent, open discussion. And they are actually going, as I say, they went to China a couple of months ago, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, to actually meet with the new wealthy of China. They're going to India in March, and they're trying to make this Giving Pledge a global movement rather than just an American movement. But so far they've got 57 American billionaires out of about 500 signed up. So, and there's going to be another set of announcements early in the new year. So it's actually going quite well. And Bill Gates was particularly pleased that he managed to get Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, to actually sign the pledge, because they are famous rivals. And so I think they're now going after Steve Jobs to try and sign him up as well from Apple.
Right. It'll certainly be interesting to see in 5 or 10 years' time how much they've given, what they've done, and what kind of impact it has had. So we're just getting ready for our coffee break now. When we come back, we'll transition and maybe start with the subject of government. Matthew Bishop is a very active tweeter. I'm following him on Twitter. And yesterday you talked about the UK's big society plans about creating a matching fund. They've done this in the past for higher education. Now they'd like to do it for the arts to get philanthropy more involved. So maybe there's a role that government can play in getting everyone, not only the rich, to give. Maybe we can start talking about that when we come back in 15 minutes. Thank you. Tekrar hoş geldiniz. Welcome back. So, where we left off on just a very brief opinions and thoughts on the role that government can play in creating a culture of giving, as you wrote, or motivating this to take place more often. I just want to make a very brief note, though, before we get started about the program. We'll be ending at 12:40, so that gives us about 25 more minutes. Soon we'll be getting into the question and answer with the audience as well. So, yes, government, can it motivate philanthropy? Should it motivate philanthropy?
Well, I think one of the points that Luke has made very powerfully is that you can't generalize too much about this, and you have to understand the specific context of each country. So I think that question raises a lot of questions that every individual country has to come up with its own answers to. However, I think there's a set of questions around what are your tax incentives towards giving. It's clear that America and Britain have very positive tax incentives, but nonetheless, America, because the way you file a tax return in America, you can deduct your charitable donations before you pay any taxes, whereas in Britain you have to kind of, the way it's structured, the charity has to claim the money back and you have to sign a form, and so you don't get the same direct connection between your giving and the tax reduction. And it seems like even relatively subtle things like that make a huge difference. In other parts of the world, there aren't the tax incentives at all to give. So that's one whole set of areas that you have to look at. The government, we were writing about matching, the extent to which governments are now looking at the idea of saying, if there is a donation from the private sector, we will match it with public spending. The British government have tried that with the university sector, where they put 100 million of public spending that was available to be sent into the university sector if the universities could raise it from their alumni. And that's actually worked pretty well. And what it's done is it's not just been a neutral thing, it's been a positive thing in that it's caused the universities to invest far more money in figuring out who their alumni are, building up the connections with their alumni, finding out what their alumni care about, and then actually hiring some fundraisers and things. So there's a feeling that you've actually tipped the fundraising system differently in the university sector in Britain so that it will be much more effective going forward, even though the matching funds are no longer going to be available. And they're now looking at doing that in the arts. But there are other ways. Britain set up something called a social investment task force about 10 years ago under the Tony Blair's government. And the idea was, how do we use tax incentives and government contracts and things to encourage much more private money to come into solving social problems? And that's actually had a number of interesting consequences, including what I think the new Conservative Liberal coalition in Britain will do, the creation of something called a Big Society Bank, which will be a bank that is really looking specifically to help charities and non-profits and social entrepreneurs to scale up what they're doing, to help bring more money in to replace what would have been done by the government in the past. So there's a whole lot of experimentation there. I think every country is going to do it in different ways, but the fundamental point where I think you can generalize is that governments everywhere are realizing that they can't solve these problems on their own, that they're simply raising taxes is no longer the answer, that there are so many demands for them from the public that they have to somehow figure out how to get the private sector engaged in different ways, and if they can't do that, they're going to be in real trouble. So everyone is grappling with this problem in different ways.
Okay. Luke, what's happening in Europe?
I'm with Matthew on what he said. I just want to add different things which has to do on the one hand with the legitimacy of the sector. This means we can be naive about it, unfortunately, is that it's not a given that governments are positive about philanthropy. It has to do also with traditions of if you have the private sector and the public sector, which space is given to civil society. In a French tradition, which Turkey, some of the French traditions came here at a certain moment. But in the French tradition, you had the state and the church, and in between there was nothing. I'm simplifying. And if there was something, it was controlled by either one of them. And so, which they call la primauté de la politique. It's the priorities of politics. It's the people who are voted in have the real legitimacy. And so we cannot start from the idea or take it as a given that governments will look at us as positive, and so implying that they will create an enabling environment. And I'm not thinking only about Europe. I mean, I'm thinking about when you look at Singapore. What is this? This more a state capitalism system. They have now decided that philanthropy is a big thing, so they will do it, but it's purely government-driven. Not speaking about China, because that's an even other context. So we have, as a sector and as philanthropists, to continue to make a point that we have this place in society, which is a valid place, which gives added value, which can work together with governments, and there also perhaps there is some hubris or less pretension sometimes from the philanthropic sector, would also help, but not always bashing governments, in the sense that if I see in the Balkan region we have worked on human trafficking, and so we worked on also with NGOs there. But a lot of NGOs, with all my respect to my US colleagues, were brainwashed to say the government is the enemy. Now, how can you work in an effective way with impact on human trafficking if you don't want to talk to the police and the justice system? So you need to know what space you have, and you need to dialogue with corporate and with government sector, but they have to give you that spot, that place, and that is still a challenge in a lot of countries. It's not a given, and it has nothing to do necessarily with what kind of ideology they have. It's a lot of cultural backgrounds in it also. I mean, look at China and the way they look at certain things, their ethics, the Confucianism. It's a different type of ethics, of course, than the Protestant one. So it has its implications. So again, as Mathieu has said, it's a complex issue. But as philanthropists, of course, we want our space. We want that it's tax friendly to us, and that we can do matching things. I mean, that's why also we have been working with the European Foundation Center and fighting to make the European Commission understand that we can work together, and that we don't have to be paid for our overhead, but that we can just pool money together and be more effective. We want the European Foundation statute because it's still complicated as a foundation to work in different parts of Europe. It's amazing, but it's still the case. So it's a lot of challenges when it's about governments.
Yeah, and I suppose just to add, I mean, it does seem there are, I think, different categories of country. There are some where I think I've been talking about, which are those countries that are broadly democratic, that want to produce high-functioning, effective societies for the 21st century. And there are other societies where their agendas are very different. It's about protecting the powerful, keeping the elite in place and so forth. So, picking a random example, Russia has, the new wealthy of Russia are all becoming philanthropists, but that includes strategies like when Vladimir Putin calls up and says, "I want the Fabergé egg to be returned to Moscow. I need someone to buy it for us." The philanthropist will do that, or another billionaire that decides he doesn't want to be arrested. It's easier if he owns a football club in London. It'll help his political strategy. I mean, so philanthropy is, each society has different roles, but I think at its best, what it can do is not replicate what government is doing, but actually help, bring innovation to bear. And I think that's what, I'm sure you're looking at here in Turkey, is how can you make the system work more efficiently and effectively? And there, I think the role of philanthropy should be less about just providing money to do things that government should be doing, and more about how do you drive innovation and change.
But that implies that because we speak about legitimacy, often we speak about legal stuff and this type of, but there is also an attitude as a foundation to have, I think, in every society, but in a different way, is to have the conversation with all what's called the stakeholders in society, is that you don't work as a foundation on your own. You have, when you work on a certain subject, you bring in people from the government, you bring in people from academia, you bring in people from the NGO sector, and you say, okay, we're faced with that problem, how can we solve that? We will bring that to the table, but it needs this dialogue. Now, in certain societies who are less democratic, it's of course a different place. I mean, if I can just use the example of, and I think that's a great example of the past, but they're still very good, is the Gulbenkian Foundation. If you take Gulbenkian during the dictatorship of Salazar, they were the only place in Portugal where there was a free space there for intellectuals and artists. And there was a kind of a deal with the government in a strange way that they could do that. But they were the only window from Portugal to the outside Portugal. So Gulbenkian has played an incredible role in being sure that after democracy, after the dictatorship, there were enough elites ready to take it up. I mean, they were not the only ones again, but they had a fantastic role in that. So even in difficult times, foundations, in relation to governments, foundations achieve sometimes to play very critical roles.
So speaking of dialogue, let's turn now to our audience. We have our first question. Meral Hanım. You're free to express your question in Turkish or in English. Our guests have headphones. Okay.
Meral Temel, Milliyet Gazetesi. Bir kere Sabancı Vakfı'na çok teşekkür ederiz. Gerçekten 4 yıldır hayırseverlik konusunda dünyada en yeni trendler neyse onu buraya kadar getiriyor ve biz bunu öğrenmiş oluyoruz. Ben şahsen belki günün yoğunluğunda gözümüzden kaçıyordu. Warren Buffett'la Bill Gates'in el ele tutuşup Çin'e, Hindistan'a hani dünya hep beraber bir şeyler yapalım diye gittiklerini buradan öğrendim. Ve takip edeceğim bundan sonra da. Ve umarım Çin'in cevabı hayırdır diye düşünüyorum. Çünkü Çinli yeni zenginlerin bu kadar yoksulluk olan Çin'de bir sürü bölgelerinde kendi yoksullarına yapacakları şeyleri vardır. Aynı zamanda da Çin'in Afrika'da çok iyi şeyler yapıyor. Yani Afrika'ya Bill Gates ya da bu Gates Vakfı ile ulaşmak durumunda mı bilmiyorum. Çünkü Afrika'nın kalkınması için çok kalıcı şeyler yapıyor Çin. Bir sürü yatırımlar yapıyor. Bir sürü Afrika ülkesinin kalıcı olarak refah seviyesini yükseltiyor. Şimdi ben Sayın Matthew'ya bir meslektaşı olarak bu kitabı yazarken ön sözünde Bill Gates var, son sözünde Bill Gates var. Şu aklına geldi mi diye soruyorum. Ben yıllar önce bir Davos toplantısında bir odada böyle Bill Gates ve Melinda Gates bir oturumda bu heyecanla bu yaptıkları büyük yatırımı anlatıyorlardı yoksullar için. Afrika'nın özellikle yoksullar için. Diğer salonlardan birinde de Microsoft'un Linux'u engellemek için galiba tekelci yaklaşımlarının masaya yatırıldığı bir oturum vardı. Yani burada benim aklıma gazeteci olarak biraz daha imaj yıkama içinde var gibi geliyor. Belki gazeteci, kendisinin aklına geldi mi acaba? Son cümle olarak da bana Avrupa'nın yaklaşımı ve Lük'ün söyledikleri çok daha yakın geliyor ve sahici hayırseverlik budur gibi geliyor. Teşekkür ederim.
Teşekkür ederiz. Okay. There's a lot of
Right,
content.
there are a lot of content there. I mean, firstly, I'm not sure whether this was the translation that I got or whether this is what you were saying. I want to be clear. When Bill Gates and Warren Buffett go around the world, they are not asking for the money to be given to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They're asking for people to give away the money however they see fit through their own foundations and so forth. They're just merely trying to say it is a good thing for the wealthy of the world to actually publicly come out and make clear that they are going to be giving their money away, and that's what they're trying to do to wherever they want to do. I mean, so to whatever cause is most close to their heart, wherever they are. Now, in China, I think they've been encouraged to go there by the Chinese government because the Chinese government is acutely aware that it has enormous social problems and that currently the behavior of its wealthy has not been, in any sense, socially harmonious, which is the word they like to use, that it's been very much conspicuous consumption and so forth. And they want to actually say, part of their process of becoming a modern, wealthy prosperous economy is that their entrepreneurs ought to be people who are giving back to society, that does fit into a harmonious Confucian view of the world, and that's why they're encouraging philanthropy. And it was interesting that the earthquake a couple of years ago was the first real moment where, having been very, very suspicious of civil society in all its forms, the Chinese government, for the first time, said we're going to encourage our wealthy to be and our businesses to be involved in the humanitarian efforts after the earthquake. So I think it's part of the this is part of the growing up process of a country like China as it returns to becoming a constructive player in the world. And there's going to be all sorts of debates about things like Africa and China's role in Africa that are going to go on at the same time as this other process of trying to bring the entrepreneurs into the social problem-solving process goes on. Now, as a journalist, I feel my obligation is to ask questions and to report on what I see. The philosophy of The Economist has always been to take part in a battle of ideas, and we come at the ideas of the world from a belief that human inquiry and engagement in argument and debate will produce a better world. So we are believers in human improvement. There is a philosophy of change and progress at the heart of our reporting. And I come at the issues of the world from that perspective. And I think you're right. There are certainly questions to be asked about the behavior of Microsoft as a monopolist. And we, in fact, had a cover story on The Economist saying, delete Microsoft, ? As exploring and arguing that Microsoft should have been broken up to encourage competition. Now, the fact that Gates is doing that indeed should make you slightly suspicious when he starts to become a philanthropist. You do ask a question, is this philanthropy just about image polishing? And that's why I am so focused in what I am writing, in getting away from the fact that someone has made a commitment to give away money, to ask the question, well, okay, what are they doing with their strategy? Are they actually making a difference? And that's where I think journalists tend to have not reported the world of philanthropy at all. They've just tended to say, it's all image, it's all vanity, it's all rubbish. When in fact, the history of philanthropy is full of extraordinary stories of this money making a huge difference to support all sorts of social movements, to deliver all sorts of change. And I think it's our responsibility as journalists, not to be sort of gooey-eyed and soft about it, but to actually talk to these people about what they're doing, find out whether it works, report on what works well, report on what doesn't work well. And I'm very struck as a journalist by how little information and little serious reporting goes on of this vast and important sector that's going to be even more important going forward. So I would say as a journalist, it's our responsibility to go in and ask the tough questions of philanthropy, just as we would ask the tough questions of business. But simply to say that someone, because they do something in business that we're not entirely happy with, that means everything else they do is not going to make a difference, or it's going to be bad, or it's just about image, I think is a bit simplistic.
It's a true challenge, of course. And I would like to make the difference between the corporate social responsibility when it's a corporate who gets into a certain philosophy of giving, and there the risks are, I think often that corporates are taking higher risks to do that because it demands a big type of discipline inside the organization, because otherwise you're going to have more negative return than positive return. If you take BP, it is a classical example these days, but they did great work in reshaping their image and beyond petroleum and a lot of also philanthropic programs, and then something like that happens, and so everything is down the drain. So they lost an enormous amount of credibility. So if you go into that, you really have to be very aware that all your organization has to follow, and absolute consistency doesn't exist, of course, but it becomes part of your risk management if you do that, because it's going to have huge effects. But you have others where you have family foundations linked to philanthropy and to the corporate. In Europe for the moment there is a big discussion with the Bertelsmann Stiftung, the Bertelsmann Foundation, which is a huge media group, And there comes a book out from a journalist criticizing the Bertelsmann family and how they use the foundation and how it is used to promote certain ideas which help the Bertelsmann company and all that. So it is a challenging issue for business people who go into philanthropy, and they have to be very aware of that, but I think it's absolutely possible, and you have to not start from the critical side and the negative side, but if I would be a person like that, you have to go through that exercise, because people cannot be naive about it. That's, I think, the message. They cannot be naive about it, and they have to take a lot of things into account which are not perhaps that much fun. And from my perspective and the perspective of the philanthropy professionals between brags, is that, of course, a scandal in one organization can really spoil the reputation of all the others. And that's a huge challenge for something like the European Foundation Center or TÜSEV here in Turkey, is that you are working with also a risk that somebody in the sector is doing something bad, and that it affects all of you. And so that's why also there is a need for associations of foundations, and there is a need of, let's call it self-regulation, but self-reflection and exchange of good practice and how you can do things better. Because I think that's one of the big challenges which Matthew referred to with the pledge, is that of course a lot of people are giving now, but they don't know yet how, and they don't know yet what, and how strategic they're going to be. But I hope there is in fact this accompanying coaching structure next to it, so there are going to be perhaps damages done which can affect all the sector. And but again, that doesn't mean it's bad, but it's you have to be aware of that.
There was a question about, also the other part of Meral Hanım's question was about Europe seeming very much like Turkey. It wasn't a question actually, it was a comment, but what do you have to say about the way that Europe is going with all of this in general, and the way that it looks at companies and philanthropy and corporate involvement?
Well,
Is it also matching and encouraging, or is philanthropy finding its place?
No, it has. We have the challenge, which is just like Matthew was saying. It's an amazing fact that so little is written and so little is known about philanthropy. Now, a lot of it is our responsibility. I mean, the European foundation sector is bigger than the US one. It's older and bigger, but nobody knows that. And it has to do with our mentality. I don't know if it's not constructive, but it's a different way of functioning in our societies. So yes, we are there. Yes, we are. But we had to fight with the European Commission, just to give that example, to show that associations and foundations are not the same thing. They wanted to give us the same statute. Now, associations are about members, and to put it simply, and foundations are about money. It's quite a different thing. It's a quite different governance structure. So yeah, there's a long road to go, and it depends on the countries. The UK, Spain, others are ahead of other countries. Holland has a system which I think has risks because it's so broad that they have a lot of people in the church, and at a certain moment there's going to be problems there, I think. But
Okay, we had another question here, and then here, and then I think, no? A question? Yes. And here, okay. Oh God, I hope we have time for all these questions.
Profesör Nail Yılmaz, Cerrahpaşa Tıp Fakültesi Vakfı Başkan Vekili. Misafirlerimize Türkiye'ye hoş geldiniz diyorum. Sempozyumun başlığı içinde bir kelime söyletmek istiyorum. Hayırseverlik dünyayı değiştirebilir mi? Değiştirir. İnsanı değiştiren her şey dünyayı değiştirebilir. Bunu söylüyorum. Hem önerim hem sorum olacak önerimin içimde. Vakıflar insanların yararına gelişen bilimlerde projelere önderlik etmelidirler diyorum. Acaba buna katılırlar mı? Bu önderlik eden bilimler de şu anda dünyada iletişim ve biyolojik bilimler. Ben bir biyolojik bilimler hocası olaraktan bizim alanımızdaki soruların sanırım yaklaşık %15'i çözümlenmiş durumda. Bizde bir söz vardır, atasözü, işin başı sağlıktır diye. Ve bu Sayın Sabancı Vakfı üyelerinin hepsi bu konuda çok önderlik etmiş kişilerdir. Bizim kurumumuzun içinde de bu konuda yardımları var. Şimdi eğer vakıfları biraz daha iyi geliştirebilmek açısından biyolojik ve sağlık bilimlerinde bu kadar çözümlenmemiş bazı projelerin üzerine gidilerek de hayırseverliği daha iyi geliştirebilir miyiz? Bunun yanında da bu yardımlarımız bu paralelde daha iyi gelişebilir mi diye kendilerine soruyorum, fikirlerini almak istiyorum.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum. I'm going to take just a few
Okay.
more questions because we're running out of time. Here and the other, Arif, was it you? Okay, and you. Okay.
Please allow me to ask my question in English. My name is Batuhan Aydagül, and I am a development specialist working in Education Reform Initiative and Mother Child Education Foundation. My question is not whether philanthropy can change the world, but more like how. And more specifically, how can philanthropy mobilize social change? Because this amount of funds that are being accumulated through the campaigns is on the one hand promising, but on the other hand, it worries me as a development specialist because I know how little absorption capacity development countries or recipient countries have. I worked in an African country, and in a year or two, we couldn't even spend $14 million because the procurement procedures weren't in place. In health, it's easier because vaccination and all kind of medical interventions are straightforward. You can actually plan, execute, and see the results. Whereas in education, for example, is much more difficult. You can make children go to school, but you cannot necessarily ensure they actually learn something.
Right.
And in that, the philanthropy can change the world as far as it reaches the people and creates change agents in these countries. My question is, do you see anything, Matthew, that actually differs from the previous developmental processes in the US within this whole new paradigm, and to look as coming from a foundation who actually provides grants, what will be the critical factor in actually making sure these funds reach to people and actually empower them to be their own change agents in their own settings? Thank you.
Thank you. Tabii ön tarafta bir sorumuz var. Thank you Batuhan. Sonra arka tarafta lütfen kısa alabilirsek zamanımız
Sure.
azalıyor.
I represent Darüşşafaka Association, an association which has been providing free education to the orphans of this country for the past 150 years and so. I want to thank both speakers for their excellent presentation, very enlightening. But during your speech, you were concentrated mainly on the philanthropic activities of the wealthy few, if I may say so. Could you share some of your experience with the community foundations, whether success stories or pitfalls in that respect? Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler. One more in the back. Yeah. Is there anyone here?
Yavuz Baydar, journalist. My question is also somewhat related to Mr. Ökütçü's question. What's your reading on the role of religion, rather specifically the religious networks and sub-networks and pious networks or sub-networks, if you will, in this context? Is it being redefined in today's world in the globe? And are they becoming more assertive and influential in this context that you're speaking about? And what is the level of interreligious network cooperation in this context again?
Okay. All right. Now, that's a lot of questions to answer in about 3 or 5 minutes, but you're experienced speakers, so we can move on. There was a question about the role of philanthropy and foundations in health, specifically. There was a question about foundations and philanthropy being able to mobilize social change, and if somehow philanthrocapitalism or venture philanthropy is shifting the way that developmental work is being done in developing countries. There's a question about community foundations, which I'm very happy to hear, and a question about religion and the impact and the dynamics of religion. So wherever you want to start. Luke, let's start with you this time.
Okay, let me start with the first question. I think you're absolutely right that foundations have a role in that, but I would just illustrate that you can go beyond research funding, which is very important and which we are doing on a modest level. But I didn't speak about that, but in my opinion, foundations have also an important role in what I call convening, is bringing people together from different backgrounds and trying to let's move the ideas and come to some conclusions you can bring further. And in science, if you take brain science, for example, one of the things we did was in 9 European countries something which is a deliberative process where we brought citizens together in 3 weekends. The first weekend you explain to them what the scientific evolution is, what the challenges are ethically, legally, and all that. The second, they can invite, I go a little bit quickly, the second, they can invite whoever they want and to get more information. The third, they come to conclusions. The scientists said we were crazy to do that. They were afraid because they thought the citizens are going to block our research effort because they say attention here, attention there. We said to them, pay attention, do this exercise, otherwise you're going to have the fierce reactions as on GMOs, as on genetic stuff. When people are not informed, they get emotional reactions to it, and then you are in problems. So try to anticipate. Big surprise, so that we did that in 9 European countries. Big surprise and applause from the scientific sector is that the citizens, when they were informed, were extremely positive. They thought there had to be more fundamental research. They had their concerns, but at least we know now the concerns. It's qualitative information you can use. So quick one, research is important, but there is also the link, research and society, where foundations can play a role. Secondly, your difficult question about, all the questions are not evident, but about education and how, I mean, the fact is that raising a child is not the same as building a house. And so you have to accept that. So you cannot do the same thing. In general, I think in philanthropy, we are still in Newton times. You think you go from A to B, from B to C, and it's all simple causalities. It's not a fact. It's chaotic, more chaotic. It's organic. So, and when you're with human beings, it's even more the case. And this means you cannot do anything alone. So when I give 2 quick examples. One, there is a huge problem, there is a problem in European societies to young people to explain poverty, what does it mean? You can say there is that much poverty there, but it's all abstract. Now we have developed a game together with Gulbenkian Foundation and Bosch, which is called Ping. Poverty is not a game, which is a game where young people get into the game and there is one figure who is a generation poor and another who gets poor because of the circumstances. Now this gives the young people a feel what it means to be poor and what it means to take decisions which makes you poor. Just a quick example. Another thing is we work at the Museum on Democracy and History. We have more than 300 classes passing by. But you cannot do that only the visit. You have to have the schools with you. So the last one, community philanthropy. I don't call it community foundations. I don't think it's a cut and paste from the US that doesn't work. It's community philanthropy. It's local philanthropy. It's extremely important. We have more than 400 associations who can have, through us, tax-deductible gifts, and we give them for free to them without any fee. And there we see the enormous amount, what Matthew has been saying through the internet, but we also see enormous amount of generosity of the people, the individual people for projects in their neighborhood, projects they like from the professional side. We have more than 300 funds which are created through legacies. And that has been, the last 100 funds has been created the last 2 years. So it's going, which is going up enormously. So there is an enormous drive, there is an enormous capacity and conviction of people that you can do something. And about the religious aspect, I think it's partly linked to it. Of course, European countries, and specifically Belgium, are very secularized. And religious giving has been there for a long time, but it has been structured also for a long time. And they went beyond their, if I take the Catholic ones, they go beyond their own communities, let's say. Now what's interesting is that we have a big Turkish community. And of course, we try also to involve them in their giving and try to help them in that. But everything for the moment is around the mosque, which is a normal thing because it's there where they see each other, they gather. We're trying to dialogue with them so that we can help them also in their philanthropy in the neighborhoods where they are or in the city, but also back to Turkey eventually. So yeah, it's short time, but I spoke too quickly for the translators, perhaps.
I'm hoping are they doing okay? I hope so. All right, Matthew.
I'll just start with the religion point. I mean, I do think that it depends whether you're talking about it at the individual level or the institutional level. Clearly all the major religions have very strong giving messages at the heart of them. And many of the philanthropists that we interview, clearly their religious faith in some way or tradition has led them, been one of the major motivators of their giving. Although, you know, others are, you know, experience exposure to particular problems through their family members getting ill or seeing something in the course of their business or whatever that has shocked them. And so I think insofar as it's a motivator, I think it's a very good thing. Institutionally, I think again you divide it between religion as a you know, service deliverer, you know, providing, you know, soup kitchens or, you know, assistance to the elderly or something like that, where I think again you're seeing, for example, the Salvation Army in America is now working with a number of high net worth individuals to try new forms of social assistance and things, where so it is open to this new movement of philanthropic capitalism in quite an interesting way. On the other hand, you know, if it's the battle of ideas, I think religion tends to be at the institutional level more of a conservative force rather than a progressive force. That's probably a generalization we could debate for years, but you know, insofar as it's doing that, I mean, I think there, you know, often the philanthropic capitalists will be on the other side to the established religious authorities, and so there's some interesting battles. Although the techniques of philanthropic capitalism may well be being used by the traditional religions to, you know, example, change public opinion, target government policies, set up organizations that are mass member organizations or cells of activists or whatever. So there's a, you know, I think it's just not very black and white, it's very overlapping. You know, I think in general, responding to the other 3 points, I mean, I do think that where the philanthropic capitalists are doing things differently to governments and other sources of funding is that they do tend to go after more after the things that are being neglected by the mainstream. So, you know, Bill Gates and others who are looking at health, you know, are going after the parts of the research where they feel there are new approaches to be followed, or that there's not enough money has gone in the past and so forth. So Gates's focus is on neglected diseases or diseases of the poor, which aren't necessarily getting the funds that are going into the diseases of the rich world. And in general, I think, you know, in terms of development assistance and so forth, that there's, I think generally the business world is much more switched on to the potential of new technology than has traditionally been the case for governments and traditional non-profit organizations. And so clearly the last 10 years has seen this extraordinary positive impact of the cell phone, mobile phone technology, and of software around that. And one of the, just one example that I've been struck by that is transforming education in India at the moment is, you know, India has 1 million teachers that don't turn up for work every day. Right, so out of that, so if you just think about that, 1 million of the teachers employed by the government don't bother turning up to work. And so no wonder they have an education problem. So someone has now had this pilot project whereby the children in the classroom are given a cell phone, and the project is photograph your teacher every day and post it on the internet. And so suddenly attendance of teachers at schools is increasing dramatically. It's costing very little money to do that. But if you think about the potential, once they've turned up, they might as well teach. So at that point, you know, you just think about the educational, and I just think that that's the sort of initiative that you're much more likely to get from a private entrepreneur or social entrepreneur on the ground coming up with an idea, and suddenly that can become a huge idea that transforms a whole system, then you are going to get it through the old ways. So I think there's a lot of potential. I think the other thing is that we do need a lot more, you know, I do think the world is becoming more transparent. The WikiLeaks thing this week sort of highlights that. And there is going to be a lot of debate about whether that's a positive or a negative thing. But on balance, I think we have to assume that the world is going to become much more transparent, and that on the whole that is going to lead us to do things better. And hopefully we will have much more informed debate by journalists and others about what is working in development, what is working in healthcare, what is working in social change, and what doesn't work than we've had in the past. And so That's why I'm sort of optimistic about this whole process.
Well, then that means we can end our seminar on an optimistic note. There was a quote that I think was in your book, Matthew, from Ted Turner, talking about how it's not just giving, it's investing in humanity. And so hopefully today we had a discussion that was fruitful and useful and informative for all of you about how we could both give and invest in humanity, and what the future of that may be. I'd like to thank Matthew Bishop and Luc Taillart again for being here with us. And thank you all for coming and your excellent questions. And again, I would highly recommend picking up these books and having a look at some of the great stories and learnings in them. Thank you again.